Welcome back for part 3. Today we are going to be installing the crank bearings and showing how to measure those and then getting the crank in. First things first, we're going to go through, and if you haven't already got these, the old main bearings out, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to pop them out of the caps. Just come in here, pretty much, if you got scribes, you can do this with anything small. Come in here, just pry in the little groove there on the tab and it should pop right out. We're gonna go ahead and speed through and do all these real quick. So the number 3 cap, the bearing is being a little bit more tricky to get out. It's probably just in there a little bit more tight. We're gonna just give it a little light tap with a screwdriver and a hammer, and there it goes. Now we will come in here and clean the surfaces of all of these real good. Looks like I'm gonna have to use a lot of brake clean, and I'm gonna use some Scotch-Brite on these too. These are pretty nasty. We got to get all this gunk off of here, make sure we got a new and clean mating surface for our bearings. So now we have our caps all clean. I mean, I'm not sure why these weren't sent to the hot tank, but I ended up power washing them with some degreaser and scrubbing them a little bit. But what you're going to want to do, you're going to want to clean up the side mating surfaces to the block here. You're going to want to clean up the mating surface to the block here. And you're going to want to make sure that this surface inside here where the bearing goes is ultra clean. And if you're unsure or maybe see a little speck of dust, just keep taking your clean pair of gloves in there, swiping it out so you know you got a good mating surface. And now we can go ahead and install the bearings here. You're going to spend a lot more time in cleaning than you are installing. And now these things come pretty clean from the factory with how they make these, so you won't have to do much cleaning. We'll do a little glove swipe on these. See how clean that is on the inside. Same for this. Looks pretty clean. This is number 3. This is the cap that holds the crank still. And now these ones, they do not actually have the little groove here, so we'll go ahead and just try and pop this in here. Seems a little tough. Let's come back to that one. Do an easy one real quick. Go ahead and pop this case open here. Make sure when you're cutting your bearings open that you don't actually gouge up the bearing itself. Let's get these out of here. Little swipe. This one's a little dirty. Look inside out too. Alright. So, we're on a regular one now, and we got the little groove here you can see. So, there we go. I'm going to feel it kind of lock in once it goes. You can see here, we have it flush with the top here and flush with the top here. And I'm going to show you guys how to measure these. So we will go ahead and go through all of these. Actually, let's come back to number 3 while we're still here. This one seemed a little over difficult for some reason. So we'll see if we can push this inwards and get it in. It should be perfectly symmetrical, so there shouldn't be a right and a wrong way to go in. at least on the number 3. All right, I like that. Now this one, on the other hand, I don't like it. Seems to be going in there a little bit too difficult. Probably take a rubber mallet on top. There. That's what I like. Alright. So that looks good. We'll go ahead and pop the rest of these in these caps. Alright, so now we are ready to pop these in the block. And there's only one right way to go in here, as long as your bearings have the little groove there. Come in here, same way as we did with the caps. Pop these in. You go right in, nice and smooth. Alright, so we got all these installed. We'll go ahead and wipe. A little swipe inside of these bearings. A little bit of dust and oil and stuff on them. Okay, so now we're going to take our crank, and this is going to be for the measuring purposes. For the crank, we're going to go ahead and set it in there. We're not going to lube anything up yet. At least this is how I like to do it. I'm sure you can go ahead and you could probably just tighten the caps down on each other so that the bearings fully seat together. But I like to just pop the crank in there so that you can get a full measurement with how it's going to be after you take the crank out. And we're actually going to torque. We're not going to fully torque the crank down, but we'll probably do about 15. Actually, we'll do about 10 pounds, just so I know I'm going to get a little bit of force on the caps so that they're squeezed together. So I'm going to go ahead and clean the crank here. All right, and we are getting ready to just set the crank in there. I want to point out, before you are ready to install or anything, you're going to want to go ahead and get all of these surfaces really nice, clean, and dry. And you're going to want to make sure you blow out all these oil ports here and just blow the whole thing off with air, just to make sure we have a nice and clean crank. And when we set this in here, we do not want to turn it, because we do not want it to grab one of the bearings and accidentally pull it up or offset it one way or the other incorrectly. Okay, very nice. Sat in there really nicely. You can just kind of look under there, make sure everything's all seated how it should be. And we are not going to turn this thing, remember. Now, we're going to set the caps on there. Now I'm going to grab the old bolts and I'm going to set them all in here. Alright, so I'm actually going to take the old hardware since we're going to be torquing these a little bit. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and just tighten all these in the center. Now we're going to go ahead and pop this down. We're going to grab our torque wrench and we're going to turn this down to 15. I'll start in the middle here. Okay, we'll do the outers to the same. Now, I'm going to go ahead and loosen everything. Go ahead and take these out. Done with those. Actually, nope, we're gonna have to crank them down one more time. Shoot. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and set these the caps back in here. We just got the crank out. Sorry, I forgot to even record that. Now we can go ahead and grab our bolts again. We'll go ahead and just give these a light tap. Let's start the inside again. Alright, we'll go in and torque these babies again. Alrighty, now next we can go ahead and get our snap gauges and our mic again. And we are going to go ahead and, let's see here, what size do we got? Yep, so we need a, for your crank you're going to need a 2 to 3 mic. And then, of course, let's see, I'll let you know what range of snap gauge you will need. Looks like 2 1/8 to 3 1/2 range for your snap gauge. We'll go ahead and measure these, and there's all kinds of different ways you can measure these. You can either just use the plastic gauge, which is what a lot of people do. I feel like that's just the easy route, because you can only get so close with how flat you will find the plastic gauge that gets flattened on the surfaces here. And we should have about 2/1000 of clearance, just like the cam. Now you can also use a bore gauge, which is, that in my opinion, that's probably the best way to go, just because you can set, and you'll have a rod that's long enough that you can go all through every single main here, and you'll pretty much set your tolerance, what you want your, or what, set your dead zone or 0 to be, and you'll go in, see your tolerances through every single one of them, and just buzz right through it. This way, it's still a really good way. I definitely think it's better than plastic gauge. We're going to go ahead and go in, and just like with the cam, we're going to measure the inside bore here on every single piece. But first we need a standard, which is going to be our crank. On this one, I think we'll go ahead and measure all of these surfaces, see how close they are to each other, and then we'll go from there. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start measuring this. We're going to start with the crank. We're going to write everything down as far as we got here first. We got 2 558.5 thousandths. 2 inch 558 thousandths on the second. And we're going to go through and measure all these real fast and write these down, and then we'll go and use a snap gauge on the main bearings over there. So I'm going to show you how this should, I'm hoping that if you do go this snap gauge and mic route, that this will show you what you can feel if you're not used to any machine tools. So this should slide with a little, oops. Should feel a little friction when you're pulling on and off. A little bit over 558 there. Just a little bit of friction. Okay, so we're gonna come in here with our snap gauge that I already recommended the size that you would need. We're gonna come in here. You can kind of see I have the snap gauge in an angle in here right now. Oh, that's not gonna be a good measurement there. Okay, see how it's in an angle? I'm touching here and then far back side of the top side. We're gonna snug the set screw here and just pull towards us. You should get a little bit of friction in there. come in here and measure. Okay, that's not a measurement I like, so we're gonna try another spot. That's a good one. Okay, so we got about 561 on that. In that first measurement, we got 558.5, so there's about 2.5 to 3 there of clearance. I'm gonna go in and measure the rest of these, and we'll come back when the rest of them are all good. So it looks like we got all of our numbers here, and that's right about what we want. These last two are exactly 2. I could have had a little variation in the snap gauge on the first 3, but those ones read about 3. The last 2 read about 2. So I think we are good to go ahead and put some lube on the journals and then the bearings, and should be able to pop this thing in there and actually torque everything in place with some new bolts. So we have the caps off. Now we went through and wiped all the bearing surfaces off on the caps and in the block. Now we're going to go ahead and take some assembly lube. You want to be careful, you don't want to get it on the top side of them, because you can risk the possibility of getting the oil underneath of it and spinning it. And it does not take very much. Now let's rub all of this in. Okay, let's go ahead and set the crank in. Okay, and do not spin it. We do not want to accidentally spin the cam bearings in there. And go ahead and put the caps on. So here we got inners are 80. We're doing the inners first. I'm going to rotate these 80 degrees. We have everything torqued there. Now we're going to do the outer bolts here. And the outer bolts are going to be a little bit different, because on every single one of them, you're going to want to put a little bit of silicone here. It looks like they already have a little bit of silicone, but it's not a bad idea to go ahead and do a little bit extra. We're going to take a little bit of high temp silicone, just dab a little bit up on the top portion here. Alright, we're going to do something a little bit different since we're using silicone. When you're doing a bolt with silicone, you actually kind of just want to get it in there by hand, and we'll let it sit for a minute so that the silicone wants to harden up, and then we will make our torque so that we know that we flatten it out correctly. While we let that sit, now we can go ahead and turn our crank. And that is smooth as butter. This is incredibly smooth, and that's what you want. And I could have shown you, but to test how quality your number 3 crank bearing is, if you set an indicator up off here and have something to touch right here, and then you shake the crank back and forth to see how much wiggle and play it has, to make sure that nothing's crazy, and you should only be able to move it maybe 1/1000th or 2. And like right here, I can't even wiggle it at all, but it turns smooth as butter. Now I'm going to let the silicone sit for a couple more seconds, and then I'll come back when we're ready to torque those. Alright, so it's been about 10 minutes. We're going to go ahead and torque these outer bolts to 18 foot-pounds.